Hello everyone. Welcome back to Oni-chan. Today, Oni brings you an incredibly cute and funny anime. The story revolves around a genius student named Nasa, but he has a strange name that people often make fun of. One day, Nasa meets a mysterious girl named Yuzaki. She saves Nasa's life in a serious car accident. From that very first encounter, Nasa instantly falls for her and confesses his love. But she has one condition. That is, they must get married. From then on, the strange marriage story of these two young people begins. Let's look forward to it together with Oni-chan. The story begins in a certain family. A couple gives birth to a healthy baby boy. But the parents don't know what name to give him. Eventually, they come up with a strange name. That name is Nasa, which they give to the baby boy. Because the father wants Nasa to grow up to be a man as great as the universe. But because of this strange name, when Nasa starts kindergarten, everyone around him makes fun of his name. However, Nasa doesn't want that to happen, because it makes him feel uncomfortable. So Nasa is determined to become someone truly outstanding, so that no one could ever make fun of him again. Nasa pushed his spirit beyond all limits. By the final year of middle school, Nasa confidently applied to a top high school with extremely high scores. But he made the teachers worry, because if Nasa failed, he would have to repeat a whole year. Still, Nasa remained firm in his decision. At that point, the teacher could only give in to Nasa's confidence. However, Nasa truly believed in himself. He always thought, no matter what fate had in store for him, he could always change it through his own efforts. Then, on the way, Nasa encountered the fate of his life. Her name was Yuzaki, a girl whose cute beauty defied all logic. She made Nasa freeze on the spot, so he followed her without thinking. Suddenly, Nasa was hit by a car on the road. One careless moment almost cost him his life. But the mysterious girl appeared again. Yuzaki successfully saved Nasa. Even so, Nasa was still severely injured. At that moment, the girl quickly left. After that, Nasa didn't go to the hospital immediately, because he wanted to find that mysterious girl. Nasa tried his best to search with hope. Fortunately, he succeeded in finding Yuzaki. Nasa introduced himself and thanked her for her help. However, the mysterious girl was surprised by how strange Nasa was. He was still able to move despite being seriously injured. At that moment, Yuzaki gently showed concern for Nasa's condition. This made him freeze in place because of how adorable she was. Suddenly, the mysterious girl began to slowly disappear in a strange way. Before she left, Nasa made up his mind to date Yuzaki. She agreed, but with one unexpected condition. Nasa had to seriously marry Yuzaki. In that moment, Nasa immediately agreed to Yuzaki without hesitation. And then, Nasa completely lost consciousness. When he woke up, Nasa was lying in the hospital. The doctor told Nasa, if Yuzaki hadn't helped him during the accident, he would have died instantly. Even then, he kept thinking about Yuzaki, even though Nasa had no information about her. After Nasa's serious accident, although he studied hard, Nasa still couldn't recover in time for the entrance exam. So he ended up missing an entire year of school. However, after a year, Nasa returned. He was still at the top of his class. But now, Nasa no longer felt like going to school. So he decided to drop out. And hoping to meet Yuzaki again, Nasa threw himself into part-time jobs. Mainly the kind that involved meeting lots of customers. But his efforts didn't lead to any success. To keep his parents from worrying, Nasa started living alone in a small house. Suddenly, Yuzaki appeared at his doorstep. At last, after some time, Yuzaki met Nasa again. However, Nasa still had many questions. In truth, neither of them knew anything about each other. And Nasa had never imagined that Yuzaki would actually come to his home. It left Nasa confused and overwhelmed. But when he looked at Yuzaki, Nasa was stunned by how cute she was. A moment later, Yuzaki suddenly handed Nasa a marriage registration form, leaving Nasa unable to believe what was happening. Flustered, he agreed to marry Yuzaki. At that moment, the two were suddenly planning to get married. Yuzaki realized everything was happening so fast, and the two of them would have to face many challenges. But Yuzaki still had confidence in her choice. Nasa was the one Yuzaki truly trusted. In the end, they went to the city hall together to officially register their marriage. On the way there, Nasa was surprised that Yuzaki didn't make fun of him because of his unusual name. When they arrived, everything went smoothly. At last, Nasa and Yuzaki officially became husband and wife. When they got home, NASA still couldn't believe what had just happened, so he wasn't mentally prepared for the fact they'd be living together. NASA felt uneasy because in the room, he only had one bed. NASA tried to think of solutions, but nothing came to mind. Suddenly, Yuzaki appeared. NASA was surprised by how prepared Yuzaki was. However, NASA always acted awkward around her. Whenever NASA looked at Yuzaki, he was completely overwhelmed by her cuteness. At that moment, NASA grew curious. Why did Yuzaki decide to marry him because the last time they met? NASA honestly hadn't done anything for her yet. This time, NASA asked her directly, but Yuzaki thought it was a silly question. She chose to keep that reason to herself. Suddenly, NASA felt uneasy, as if Yuzaki might disappear again. So at that moment, NASA decided to go buy a new mattress. Eventually, the two of them ended up at a nearby mattress store. However, Yuzaki had a really hard time choosing. During that time, NASA gently took Yuzaki's hand, and the two of them picked one together. The mattress shopping finally ended. The two quickly returned home. NASA was surprised by how forward Yuzaki was, but that made NASA feel shy. He was always flustered by Yuzaki's sudden actions. Eventually, they turned off the lights and got ready for bed. NASA was stunned by how artistic and beautiful Yuzaki looked. It left him completely wide awake. Meanwhile, Yuzaki had already fallen into a deep sleep, but NASA's heart kept pounding non-stop. He quietly watched Yuzaki as she slept. However, NASA wanted to do something important. He gently leaned in, intending to kiss her on the lips. But after reconsidering, he immediately returned to his bed. The next morning, NASA was curious about how Yuzaki had slept. At that moment, Yuzaki suddenly started changing clothes in the room, which completely shocked NASA. He panicked and quickly ran outside. A while later, when they met again, Yuzaki was curious about how they should address each other. She got angry at NASA's hesitation, but NASA was only nervous and unsure. In the end, they came to an agreement on how to address each other. Then Yuzaki skillfully started preparing breakfast. It made NASA feel excited. Later, Yuzaki was surprised to learn that NASA also cooked. He explained that what you put into your body is really important. So NASA had studied daily nutritional intake very thoroughly. As a result, he ate only one dish every single day. But Yuzaki strongly disagreed with that. She told NASA she'd show him what a real meal looked like. In just 10 minutes, Yuzaki amazed NASA with how skillful she was. Her cooking completely won NASA over. At that moment, the two decided to go to a public bathhouse. So NASA prepared everything carefully. Yuzaki was surprised by the public bathhouse that NASA introduced, because it was nothing like what she had imagined. At the entrance, there was a staff member sweeping the floor. Her name was Konami. Konami was NASA's junior back in high school. At that moment, she was curious about Yuzaki, because Konami always thought NASA only cared about studying, so she assumed he wouldn't be interested in anything else. But NASA immediately denied that. Then he explained to Yuzaki that Konami was a hard-working girl. Even though she was still young, she helped out with her family's work. Although Konami was a good person, she often teased others, which sometimes annoyed NASA a bit. At that moment, Konami got curious about NASA and Yuzaki's relationship. When she found out they were married, Konami was so shocked that she fell over. Even though it all sounded confusing to her, Konami still congratulated the two on their marriage. Then it was Yuzaki's turn to enter the bathhouse. But when it was NASA's turn, Konami stopped him, because she wanted NASA to explain everything properly. Konami just couldn't accept the truth about the fact that NASA was married. Suddenly, Konami asked NASA if Aya knew about his marriage, but NASA didn't understand why that mattered, which made Konami sigh and call him a clueless guy. At that moment, she told NASA to keep it a secret from Aya. Even though the two were already married, NASA still didn't have any plans for a wedding ceremony. He hadn't even officially proposed to Yuzaki yet. In the end, Konami felt that NASA didn't fully understand the meaning of marriage. She got annoyed and spoke frankly to NASA that when he chose Yuzaki to be his wife, it meant he had a responsibility to make her happy. Even though there wasn't a specific obligation, he should still treat Yuzaki with sincerity from his own heart. Konami firmly stated that this was the true meaning of marriage. That made NASA frustrated with himself. At that moment, Yuzaki suddenly appeared, causing NASA to freeze in place. In the end, both of them were inside the bathhouse. As for NASA, He kept thinking about all the chaotic situations at the public bath. Then, Nasa went to look for Yuzaki. Suddenly, Konami appeared out of nowhere, making Nasa feel embarrassed, because Konami was supposed to be watching over the bathhouse. So she often went in and out to clean the place. At that moment, Konami continued teasing Nasa. Meanwhile, on Yuzaki's side, she was calmly relaxing alone in the bath. However, a strange girl suddenly appeared. That girl was none other than Aya, the one everyone mentioned earlier. But Yuzaki didn't yet know who Aya was. At that moment, Aya did many strange things, making Yuzaki think this weird girl was kind of crazy. However, Aya kept talking to Yuzaki, and the two became closer than before. Just then, Nasa suddenly woke up. Lying beside him was Yuzaki. She told Nasa his sleeping face was really cute, which made Nasa feel shy. Right at that moment, Aya showed up between the two of them. Aya still misunderstood the relationship between Yuzaki and Nasa. Then, Yuzaki grew curious about Aya, so she directly asked Nasa. As a result, Nasa explained, Aya was his classmate back in high school, and Nasa had helped her family's business a lot, because many years ago, after Aya's grandfather passed away, her family's business suddenly went downhill. Even Aya's relatives didn't help her, which made things really difficult for her. However, Nasa alone was able to help Aya, so Aya was always grateful for Nasa's kindness. A little while later, Nasa and Yuzaki walked home. On the way, they had a heartfelt conversation. Yuzaki said she thought Aya was a cute girl. At that moment, Nasa agreed without thinking. According to what he shared, back in high school, Aya was very popular. Many people liked her because of her adorable looks. The atmosphere suddenly became very strange. It turned out Yuzaki was feeling jealous because of Nasa's careless words. In truth, Yuzaki also wanted to be praised directly by Nasa like that. Later, when Yuzaki returned home, she felt disappointed to be all alone. So she waited for Nasa with hopeful anticipation. At that moment, Yuzaki felt shy because of what she had just said. A while later, Yuzaki wanted to surprise Nasa, so she decided to clean the entire room thoroughly. But unexpectedly, Nasa had already finished all the chores before her. At that moment, Yuzaki felt flustered. Because of that, she felt like she had no chance to show her skills as a wife. Yuzaki thought for sure Nasa must have missed a few spots, so she tried to find other areas to clean. But then, Yuzaki got nervous she might discover some of Nasa's secrets, so she decided to leave it alone. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Yuzaki felt happy, thinking Nasa had come home. But when she opened the door, a girl named Chitose appeared. She was Yuzaki's younger sister. Chitose had been looking for Yuzaki for a while. She was shocked that Yuzaki was living in such a rundown house. Yuzaki immediately shut the door, but Chitose kept making noise and disturbing the neighbors, because she wanted to talk with Yuzaki. Yuzaki didn't understand why Chitose wanted to take her back home. It turned out Yuzaki had disappeared suddenly, which made their grandmother, Tokiko, very worried. However, Yuzaki knew that if she stayed by Tokiko's side, she would just end up bothering her. At that moment, Yuzaki became curious. She wondered whether Tokiko actually knew about this situation. But everything Chitose was doing was simply because she was worried about Yuzaki. Suddenly, Yuzaki made an announcement. She said that she was married, which shocked Chitose. Yuzaki advised her to just go home and not cause a scene, because right now, Yuzaki was living just fine. Out in the hallway, Chitose was crying sadly when Nasa appeared and showed concern for her. However, Chitose didn't want his help, but she was surprised by how thoughtful Nasa was. After a while of talking, Nasa found out that Chitose's family member had left, and it was someone very important to her. At that moment, Nasa sincerely wanted to help Chitose. She was moved because Nasa was such a kind person, but Yuzaki was already there. And that's when Chitose realized the relationship between Nasa and Yuzaki. Suddenly, Chitose exploded in anger, but in contrast to Chitose's emotions, Nasa happily greeted her, which left Chitose confused. However, thanks to Nasa's communication skills, he left Chitose speechless. Nasa fully understood Chitose's anger, because he knew it would be hard for her to accept their relationship, especially since he and Yuzaki had only known each other for such a short time. Everything had happened so suddenly. However, Nasa affirmed that he was determined to spend time understanding each other. At that moment, Yuzaki was impressed by NASA's way with words. But that still didn't calm Chitose down. She quickly took NASA to a different location. This time, Chitose had a plan to destroy their marriage. She was going to make NASA cheat. That way, once Yuzaki found out the truth, she would immediately break up with him. However, Chitose's group had a minor disagreement. Meanwhile, NASA got lost in Yuzaki's house. So he tried to find Yuzaki's room. Thanks to a familiar scent, NASA was able to pinpoint the exact location of the room. That was when he discovered a strange item. NASA wondered if it might be a moonstone. He was shocked when he found out the truth. Just then, one of Chitose's maids found him. She didn't hesitate to attack NASA. In the process, the girl ended up destroying Yuzaki's precious item. Luckily, NASA quickly managed to fix it. While he was repairing it, Chitose realized that NASA knew nothing about Yuzaki's past. That's when she revealed. In the past, Chitose once fell off a cliff by accident, just in time. Yuzaki grabbed Chitose's arm and saved her life. Since that moment, Chitose had wanted to repay Yuzaki with her entire life. That's why she didn't want anyone else to get close to Yuzaki. At that point, Chitose's maids seized the opportunity. They succeeded in making NASA look like he was cheating, which made him furious. Suddenly, Yuzaki appeared. She was outraged by Chitose's group's actions. However, Yuzaki quickly found a chance to escape. The two of them went to an abandoned church. Yuzaki had really wanted NASA to see this place, because to her, it was truly beautiful. When they returned home, Yuzaki wanted to watch TV with NASA, but she was surprised because NASA's house never had a TV before. It turned out he rarely watched movies. As it happened, Yuzaki's favorite movie was going to air that evening. She felt disappointed because she might miss it. At that moment, Yuzaki couldn't hold back anymore, because their emotions were completely out of sync. To Yuzaki, movies were her passion. Even NASA was surprised by how much Yuzaki knew about film. In the end, they went to the store to buy a TV. NASA was unsure about which one to choose. On the other hand, Yuzaki believed the real value lay in the movie itself. So any TV was fine for her. At that moment, Yuzaki suddenly felt happy because of NASA's small gesture. The next day, NASA went to the public bathhouse where Konami worked. He revealed that he had successfully confessed to Yuzaki. However, to Konami, NASA was still missing a wedding ring. But NASA didn't think it was that important, which made Konami upset. She clearly explained to NASA the secrets of how girls think. That made NASA think deeply about it. In the end, he changed his view about the ring. Indeed, for girls, everyone wants to have an expensive ring. At that moment, Yuzaki stepped out of the bath. The two of them headed home together. Suddenly, Yuzaki noticed a park nearby, so they decided to stop by for a bit. Yuzaki loved the peaceful scenery. Suddenly, the atmosphere between them became quiet. At that moment, NASA gently took Yuzaki's hand, and slowly, the two of them shared their first kiss. Unexpectedly, Chitose's maids were secretly following them. A while later, Yuzaki felt shy because of NASA's actions in broad daylight. But it was all because of how cute Yuzaki was. Eventually, NASA and Yuzaki returned home. Not long after, NASA quickly headed to work. But before leaving, NASA was worried that Yuzaki might disappear. However, Yuzaki reassured him that would never happen. So NASA felt at ease and went to work. While working, NASA kept thinking about the moment in the park. Right then, he thought they needed wedding rings, so they could feel each other's presence. Because in the past, after Yuzaki disappeared, NASA always believed he would meet Yuzaki again one day. That's why NASA kept trying hard. He took on jobs where he could meet many people, hoping to find Yuzaki among the crowd. After finishing work, NASA happily returned home. He was curious about how Yuzaki felt about wedding rings. Unexpectedly, Yuzaki thought they weren't necessary, because they were already married to each other. The time to own it might have passed. But NASA didn't want things to end that way. Because to him, a wedding ring was a symbol of a wonderful love. But Yuzaki thought, NASA truly had no idea how expensive wedding rings could be. So the next day, the two of them went to a luxury store. At that moment, NASA was stunned by the price of a single ring. Sensing things weren't going well, Yuzaki quickly pulled NASA out of the store. She felt helpless before NASA's determination. So she brought him to a regular jewelry shop. But NASA realized the quality was different. To him, the purpose of buying a ring was to make Yuzaki feel less lonely. Because with a ring, They could always feel like the other person was by their side, even if they were far apart. Touched by Nasa's sincerity, Yuzaki didn't hesitate to kiss him on the cheek. In the end, Yuzaki decided to buy the cheapest ring. To her, she still felt happy seeing the ring, and she would always remember what happened today. That evening, after the two of them went to bed, Nasa couldn't explain it at all, after so many days of living together. It was the first time Yuzaki had slept with Nasa on the same bed. At that moment, Nasa just couldn't fall asleep. Suddenly, he gently hugged Yuzaki. Her scent made Nasa feel at ease. He felt a warmth coming from deep within. All of a sudden, Yuzaki turned around and kissed Nasa by accident. However, a little while later, she returned to her own futon. So Nasa ended up staying awake the entire night. The next morning, Nasa decided he would buy them a double bed. He remembered the warmth they shared last night, which made him flustered all over again. A while later, he arrived at Konami's public bath. Nasa confided in her, telling her he was thinking of moving to a new place, because he wanted to create a more comfortable space for Yuzaki. At that moment, Konami was shocked, because she realized they hadn't actually slept together yet. Konami blurted out, if it were her in that situation, she would have broken up a long time ago. That made Nasa nervous, because he feared Yuzaki might think the same way. This time, Nasa returns home. However, as soon as he opens the door to his room, Nasa accidentally sees Yuzaki changing clothes, which completely surprises him. At that moment, things become awkward between them. Nasa directly tells Yuzaki he wants to move to a more comfortable house. After Nasa's persuasion, Yuzaki finally agrees, but the condition is that they need approval from a guardian. Unexpectedly, Nasa forgets something important. He never told his parents about the marriage. So now they have to find a way to inform his parents. But when Nasa calls home, he panics after hearing his parents yelling loudly. The next day, Nasa receives a message from his mother. She has already found out the truth on her own. So Nasa's mother wants to meet Yuzaki in person, and she wants to think about the guardian's approval. Because of that, they decide to visit his parents as soon as possible. As for Nasa, he thinks going back home might not be such a bad thing. Nasa plans to take this opportunity to go on a honeymoon with Yuzaki. After hearing about Nasa's plan, Yuzaki says she wants to buy a camera, because she wants to preserve the moments spent with Nasa. Yuzaki plans to take one photo every day and write a note with it. Her goal is to create a secret couples album, so they can look back at their happy daily memories. On their journey back home, the two of them share many beautiful memories. However, Chitose's group decides to follow them. Chitose ignores all warnings to stop, because she still hasn't accepted their marriage. They arrive at a rest stop. At this point, Nasa is exhausted from the discomfort of the bus ride. But on the contrary, Yuzaki feels completely refreshed, which surprises Nasa with her stamina. Meanwhile, Chitose's group is secretly spying from behind. Chitose feels jealous of their loving relationship, but at the moment, she can't do anything about it. This time, Nasa and Yuzaki are excited to eat at the diner. However, Nasa chooses a rather plain dish, which makes Yuzaki upset, because they're currently in a place full of delicious local food. Yuzaki doesn't want to miss out on anything, so she picks a specialty dish from the area. Yuzaki always researches everything around her thoroughly, which surprises Nasa with her knowledge. The atmosphere between them is filled with joy. It's completely different from what Chitose's group had imagined. While Nasa takes the chance to go to the restroom, Chitose approaches Yuzaki from a distance. She immediately bursts into anger at Yuzaki, demanding to know what Yuzaki is doing here. Just as tension rises between them, a strange girl suddenly appears, startling both of them, and they quickly run away in fear. Yuzaki and Nasa successfully get back on the bus after escaping. At that moment, Yuzaki wonders how Nasa's parents will react to their marriage, because she feels sad that Chitose disapproves. But Nasa comforts Yuzaki, telling her he'll do his best to convince his parents. Eventually, they arrive at their destination. Nasa starts planning a date with Yuzaki. He asks her about the places she wants to visit the most. However, Yuzaki's ideas are completely different from Nasa's, causing a small disagreement between the two. After a while, although Yuzaki isn't interested in history, she still agrees to visit the places Nasa suggests. Nasa is surprised by Yuzaki's outfit at that moment. Yuzaki looks absolutely stunning in traditional Japanese clothing. However, Chitose's group appears again to ruin their plans. Although Nasa wants to spend time alone with Yuzaki, so they can enjoy some private moments together. He also wants to receive approval and blessings for their marriage. That's why NASA hopes everyone can have fun together. At this point, Chitose sets a condition for NASA. If NASA can convince her that he truly deserves to be with Yuzaki, then she won't oppose their marriage. This time, NASA confidently agrees to her challenge. But in Chitose's mind, she believes NASA could never pull that off. On Yuzaki's side, Chitose's group keeps asking her personal questions, making Yuzaki feel a bit embarrassed. She admits, Yuzaki likes NASA's cuteness, especially when he introduces others to her. NASA often starts by complimenting people. Yuzaki believes a person's character is shown through their words. So after hearing the way NASA speaks, Yuzaki feels that he is a gentle person. And that's exactly her type. As for NASA, he always tries to show his true self. However, Chitose keeps trying everything she can, so that she can find fault in NASA. But unexpectedly, NASA doesn't hesitate, and he starts talking about Yuzaki's adorable qualities. Suddenly, Chitose becomes irritated, because deep down, she knows NASA is exactly the kind of person Yuzaki likes. That's the real reason behind Chitose's frustration. Chitose becomes curious about how NASA came into Yuzaki's life. At that moment, NASA reveals that Yuzaki saved his life 2 years ago. Without her help, he could have died. After a long time, the two of them reunited. NASA believes that Yuzaki is the destined one for him. He feels like he has finally found what he's been searching for since he was born. Chitose is left speechless by NASA's sincerity. Eventually, NASA and Yuzaki head out to meet his parents. NASA introduces Yuzaki to his parents. At that moment, she's very nervous. Even NASA is the same, because he's worried his parents might do something weird that could make Yuzaki uncomfortable. Finally, the two officially meet NASA's mother. His mother's name is Kanoka. She also feels awkward about this first meeting. A moment later, NASA goes to look for his father. His father's name is Anishi. It turns out NASA's dad is extremely nervous, so he's been staying in his room all morning. Yuzaki thanks NASA's parents for taking the time to meet her. She even thoughtfully prepares gifts for them. However, NASA's parents are still not mentally ready, so they can't behave naturally. Suddenly, the family wants to talk to Yuzaki in private, but NASA refuses, because he's afraid they'll say something weird. So a small disagreement happens between them. However, Yuzaki calmly agrees to the private talk. After it ends, Yuzaki tells NASA that his parents are wonderful people, completely different from what NASA had imagined. At this moment, NASA becomes curious about their conversation, but Yuzaki says it's a secret. Suddenly, Kanoka appears at the doorway. She has already prepared the futons for the two of them. She even warns NASA to be careful, because his parents' room is right next door. And most importantly, the walls are not soundproof. But NASA didn't understand what was going on. A moment later, it seemed NASA finally understood Kanoka's thoughts. He wished she wouldn't worry so unnecessarily. However, even NASA felt embarrassed and a little excited. When they were about to sleep, NASA took the initiative to lie closer to Yuzaki. Although he felt amazing, his arms started to hurt badly. Even Yuzaki noticed what was really going on, but NASA immediately denied it, making Yuzaki burst out laughing at how silly he was. Then she suddenly gave NASA a sweet kiss. The next morning, Yuzaki woke up early to watch the sunrise. At that moment, she ran into Anishi. Anishi became flustered when Yuzaki called him Dad. It turned out he was embarrassed to be called that by her. However, Anishi kept getting more nervous, because he didn't know how to keep the conversation going. At that point, Yuzaki quickly caught on. She found out that Anishi was an archaeologist, so she asked to see his study room. When Yuzaki arrived there, she began to understand the reason behind NASA's intelligence. After spending some time exploring, Anishi was surprised by Yuzaki's interest in history. Later, everyone gathered together for breakfast. At that moment, Yuzaki explained to NASA that even though she didn't like things related to history, she realized that kind of thinking wasn't right. So she came up with a wonderful plan. If something historical involved NASA, then Yuzaki thought it would be really exciting. That way, she could enjoy the tour comfortably. At that point, NASA decided to spend the whole day taking her to visit nearby landmarks. First, they went to see the Great Buddha of Nara. NASA was amazed by its grandeur. Next, they visited a temple nearby. It was a temple built 1400 years ago. NASA was surprised by Yuzaki's knowledge, even though she wasn't into history. Yuzaki knew a lot about it. Then they took a commemorative photo together. At the next location, people had actually lived there 1300 years ago. Yuzaki knew all the details. Over 100,000 people had laughed, talked, and loved one another. They had lived a life full of dreams and desires. Nasa was astonished by this truth. When the two returned home, Anishi had something he wanted to say to them. Suddenly, he bowed his head and thanked Yuzaki. Because without her help, Nasa wouldn't have been able to keep on living. Anishi sincerely thanked Yuzaki. Nasa is the wonderful son of Anishi and Kanoka. So when they found out the two got married, Anishi didn't have any other intention except to give his blessings to Nasa and Yuzaki. Yuzaki was deeply moved when she heard Anishi say that. She also hoped to receive their support from now on. One thing Yuzaki always loves about Nasa is his thoughtful and caring nature. Nasa even cherishes every small memory they share. And when he faces difficulties, Nasa stays calm and handles them with certainty. To Yuzaki, Nasa is someone she can truly rely on. At that moment, the two were at Konami's public bathhouse. Nasa didn't know what to do about moving, because his house had burned down. Suddenly, Konami appeared in front of Nasa, surprising him. After Nasa explained the situation to Konami, she thought Nasa could stay at her place for a few days, until Nasa finds a new place to live. He's truly grateful for Konami's kindness. After a while, Konami led them to a temporary room. It was a room that Konami's family no longer used. However, Nasa still felt that Konami should discuss it with Ada or her mother. Even though, to Konami, it wasn't a big deal. Nasa felt lucky to have found this temporary place. But Yuzaki disagreed, because whenever someone is in trouble, Nasa is always willing to help others. That's why this is simply the result of what he deserves in return. Yuzaki honestly expressed her thoughts. At this moment, Konami's real problem began, because Ada has a crush on Nasa. But Ada is so innocent by nature that she hasn't realized Nasa is already married. Konami was curious about Ada's feelings after she got to live under the same roof as Nasa. But this made Ada flustered. She immediately denied having feelings for Nasa. Just then, Nasa appeared. He thanked Ada for her help. At that moment, Ada was shocked to learn that Nasa was married. After her mother suddenly revealed the truth, which made Ada furious, because she hadn't known the truth. Ada recalled the past. The first time she met Nasa was when she was 10 years old. Back then, Ada admired Nasa for his intelligence. However, Ada's mother ended her flashback. Ada officially experienced her first heartbreak. At that moment, Ada got angry because her mother was being insensitive, which led to a heated argument between them. On Nasa's side, he blamed himself, because he hadn't realized Ada's feelings for him. But Konami immediately disagreed, because the fault lay with Ada. She didn't have the courage to express her true feelings. That's why Ada ended up losing. Ada then slowly reflected on everything. It was all because she lacked the courage herself. If she kept holding on to the sadness, then her first love would lose its meaning. This time, Ada faced Nasa directly. She congratulated him on his marriage, and wished them happiness together. A few days later, Yuzaki wanted to do some laundry. Suddenly, Nasa offered to help her bring it to the laundromat. But that made Yuzaki feel a bit awkward, because Yuzaki didn't want Nasa to see her underwear. The atmosphere between them suddenly became awkward. At that moment, Konami's mother had a favor to ask Yuzaki, so she went out to help. Nasa was left alone in the room. He secretly sniffed the scent on her clothes. Suddenly, Konami appeared outside the door, making Nasa flustered and nervous. In the end, they managed to get to the laundromat. While waiting for the laundry, Nasa started teasing Yuzaki, which made her blush. Their bond gradually became stronger. When they got home, Konami thought Nasa should buy more clothes for Yuzaki, because all her clothes had been burned in the fire. But Nasa didn't seem to care much about that. So Konami gave him a little lesson. That's why, after meeting up with Yuzaki, the two of them went shopping for new clothes together. At that moment, Nasa felt shy because of how cute Yuzaki looked. But he didn't like the outfit she picked, because Nasa thought it was too revealing. He felt jealous that others might look at Yuzaki. After they were done, on their way home, Yuzaki felt happy to be making such fun memories with Nasa. When they got home, the two cheerfully prepared a meal together. Nasa was surprised by Yuzaki's cooking skills. Yuzaki was happy to see Nasa enjoying the food. He wished he could eat like this every day. Their relationship continued to grow stronger. The next day, NASA's former landlord offered to introduce him to a new place. NASA wondered if he should move into the new house. However, he hadn't made up his mind yet, but NASA thought it wouldn't be right to stay at Konami's house forever. So he asked Yuzaki what she thought. The two of them decided to go check it out, but they were shocked by how grand the building looked. Even Yuzaki thought they might have come to the wrong place. Still, they decided to go in and take a look. When they got inside, they were surprised by how luxurious it was. Yuzaki could enjoy the view outside while taking a bath. The bed was also big enough for them to sleep together. In the end, they decided to move in. Unfortunately, the landlord had actually sent them the wrong address. But Yuzaki still hoped that one day. She hoped that one day she could live in a dream apartment like that. But for now, Yuzaki felt she could live anywhere. As long as NASA was there. That alone made her happy. Because she could feel NASA's warmth. And it wasn't just Yuzaki who felt that way. NASA thought the same as she did. The next morning, Konami, as usual, woke up early, because she needed to prepare to open the public bathhouse. That was part of her daily routine. For Konami, it wasn't really a big deal. But balancing her job with her schoolwork was still quite difficult. Just then, Yuzaki appeared. She came with the intention of helping Konami. Because Yuzaki felt bad staying at Konami's house without doing anything. So she wanted to help out Konami's family. Even though Konami didn't know much about Yuzaki, she could feel Yuzaki's sincerity. The two of them started cleaning together. After watching the way Yuzaki worked, Konami was surprised by how hard she worked. At that moment, Yuzaki confided in Konami. Yuzaki said she truly respected Konami. Because her job wasn't easy at all. And yet, Konami did it diligently every single day. Yuzaki thought Konami was honestly amazing. At that moment, Konami finally understood why NASA liked Yuzaki so much. A little later, Konami bowed her head and thanked Yuzaki. Because she had saved NASA's life. Unexpectedly, Yuzaki also felt thankful. Because she had been able to save NASA. Yuzaki recalled how, when the truck came close, she acted immediately without thinking. Even though she was seriously injured, she still felt lucky, because NASA had survived. Eventually, it was time for Konami to go to school. Just then, Yuzaki met up with NASA. He was surprised by how close Yuzaki and Konami had become. But that was Yuzaki's little secret. That night, the two of them went out for a walk together. Along the way, they suddenly felt hungry, so they bought some street food to share. The atmosphere was filled with happiness. Suddenly, Yuzaki grew curious. She wondered why NASA had taken her down such a quiet street. It made him feel a little flustered. At that moment, NASA slowly stepped closer. He gently pulled Yuzaki into a hug. The two of them grew more affectionate. They exchanged words of love with one another. On another day, Chitoza's group was suddenly shocked. Because Yuzaki had disappeared without a word. They were worried about her safety. Out of nowhere, Yuzaki appeared behind them. It turned out that she had run out of ingredients at home. So she went to the supermarket. But at that moment, Chitoza became curious about the house. She had no idea what had happened. Ignoring Chitoza's concern, Yuzaki suddenly walked away. Because she didn't want Chitoza to know where they were staying. In the end, Yuzaki made it back home successfully. But that peace didn't last long. Chitoza eventually found out where they were living. She felt disappointed by how distant Yuzaki had been. But suddenly, her group was surprised by the place. It was their first time visiting a public bathhouse. So Konami warmly invited everyone to come in and relax. Unexpectedly, after this experience, Chitoza's group felt incredibly relaxed. However, returning to the original purpose, Chitoza wanted Yuzaki to move back in with her. But Yuzaki immediately refused. This broke Chitoza's heart. The two of them started to have a conflict. Suddenly, Ada appeared between them. Seeing that everyone was gathered together, NASA came up with a plan. He suggested throwing a fun party, so that everyone could grow closer to one another. This time, Yuzaki volunteered to cook, but Ada doubted her cooking skills. So Ada decided to wait and see, wondering if Yuzaki was truly suited to be NASA's wife. By the afternoon, everyone was amazed by the grand feast that Yuzaki had prepared. After taking a bite, Ada was thrilled by how unbelievably delicious it was. A little while later, Ada came up with a new game. Everyone took turns competing in the challenge. Chitoza was helpless against Ada's skills. Next up was Yuzaki's turn to face the challenge. However, she was completely defeated by Ada. Wanting revenge, Yuzaki changed to a different game. This time, Ada started to get flustered. Because of the unfamiliar controls, both of them focused seriously on the battle. In the end, when it was finally over, they both let out a sigh of relief. Unexpectedly, they became much closer. Everyone shared some wonderful moments together. The next day, NASA's company was facing a lot of problems, so he had many tasks to deal with. At this moment, Yuzaki gave NASA a warning. She told him to be careful, because once he starts working, he tends to overwork without rest. Yuzaki believed that this could affect his health. After NASA finished his work, Yuzaki's prediction unfortunately came true. NASA had completely fallen ill. His body became more and more fatigued, so Yuzaki took care of NASA the entire day. By nighttime, NASA's condition had improved a lot, so Yuzaki decided to wipe his body clean for him, so that NASA could change his clothes. But it made him feel shy and embarrassed. Even so, NASA still listened to Yuzaki. During that moment, the two of them shared even more happy memories together. By nightfall, Yuzaki seriously worried about NASA, because he still didn't know how to properly rest. Just as Yuzaki had said, NASA realized he also needed to take better care of his health. After that, the two of them happily fell asleep together. Suddenly, NASA remembered the summer festival. He wanted to go there with Yuzaki. Both of them started looking forward to that day. The next morning, even Konami was excited about the summer festival. She advised Yuzaki to wear the perfect outfit, so she could surprise NASA. A little while later, they all wore traditional Japanese clothes. NASA thought Yuzaki looked incredibly cute. After staring at her for a while, he gently kissed Yuzaki on the lips. Their moment of happiness filled the entire room. And then, they finally arrived at the festival. The two of them quickly searched for delicious street food. After that, they discovered an interesting festival game. But surprisingly, the people running the booth were none other than Ada and Chitose. That caught them both off guard. At that moment, Yuzaki decided to try the goldfish scooping game. She was confident in her own skills. However, Ada didn't think this would go well. So Yuzaki quickly gave NASA a chance to step up. To show off his manly side, everyone around them cheered NASA on enthusiastically. So his spirit grew more and more excited. However, NASA failed right on his very first try. It left him embarrassed, and he quietly walked away. Yuzaki gently comforted NASA at that moment, because even when he was working, she still thought NASA looked really cool. Up ahead, there was a shrine, so the two of them decided to go inside and make a wish. This time, NASA was surprised by what Yuzaki prayed for. She didn't just pray for the two of them, Yuzaki also wished for the happiness of everyone around them. NASA was deeply touched by her kind heart, because she genuinely cared about others, and especially about NASA himself. Just then, NASA gently pulled Yuzaki into his arms. He sincerely thanked her for everything. But just before they could kiss, everyone else suddenly showed up, making them instantly flustered and embarrassed. At that moment, the whole group had gathered. They all happily watched the fireworks together. In that fleeting moment, NASA knew he would always remember these beautiful memories. He hoped that, from now on, they could always stay like this, watching the fireworks bloom across the night sky together. And that's the end of today's video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support Oni-chan in the next videos. Thank you so much for watching. Much love to all of you.